BNP Paribas was charged in France over accusations it laundered money stemming from corruption and embezzlement in a case over alleged ill-gotten assets linked to Gabon. The charges were issued as part of an investigation into French wealth of the family of the late Gabonese President Omar Bongo. BNP is suspected of having failed in its due diligence obligations because it didn't report to authorities a suspicious bank account where tens of millions of euros were allegedly used by the Bongo family to acquire real estate in France. Johannesburg, financial capital of South Africa, wants to meet 35% of its energy needs from renewable sources by 2030 and will seek proposals for privately supplied power by August. Johannesburg is looking for its own power supplies after the government last year said municipalities could buy electricity from companies other than, there they are, Eskom SOC Limited. And to vaccines now, the slow rollout of coronavirus vaccines in Africa could cost the continent $14 billion a month in economic output, according to a World Bank official. Here's the quote: COVID-19 pandemic continues to exert pressure on African economies and exacerbate poverty. We estimate that every month of delay in the provision of COVID-19 vaccines has the potential to cost the African continent close to $14 billion in lost GDP. That's Dena Ringgold, who's the World Bank Africa Regional Director for Human Development. Joining us to discuss further is Sanyade Okoli, CEO of Alpha African Advisory. Sanyade, thank you so much for joining us. Good morning. $14 billion a month, that is a sizable amount of money. And could it possibly be exaggerated?
Well, we'll never really know until we see how things play out. But let's put it in some context. The GDP of Africa is about $2.6 trillion. So if you look at $14 billion a month and annualize that, you're looking at roughly 170 billion a month in the context of 2.6 trillion.
Okay.
It's 6-7%, which is not unreasonable when you think of the level of recessions that certain countries faced during 2020. So it just puts it into context. It's not preposterous.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. By annualizing that, you make the picture a whole lot clearer. How would you say the vaccine flare-ups in India have affected the rollout of vaccinations on the African continent?
Well, the big issue we're having now, I guess not just in Africa but globally, is the new bottleneck it has created. Because whereas, in February, where India felt they were in complete control of the COVID situation, and they therefore could export a whole lot of the vaccines being produced there, because of the current situation, they have, slowed to, at best, a trickle the export of vaccines, which is required across the world, including the continent. So it's had a huge impact. And I guess, again, only time will tell exactly how long it will take for India to bring the pandemic situation under control and for them to feel that they have sufficiently vaccinated their own population to open the floodgates again to export the required volume of vaccines.
Now, thank you for that. The Dena Ringgold, who with the World Bank, who we just quoted, she said about 36 or so states with respect to vaccine finance requirements that have been submitted to the World Bank amount to $2 billion. That doesn't sound like a lot of money. I mean, does that illustrate the financial struggles on the continent when it comes to this program?
I think it illustrates a few things. One of them is, yes, the financial challenges, because as you know, quite a few of the African nations, their economies were under some level of strain even prior to the pandemic. They were already operating with budget deficits, et cetera, so they really didn't have, surplus cash to be able to invest. But then you also have the issue of, for example, Malawi in the news yesterday or the day before, where they were having to incinerate expired vaccines. So even as a country, you cannot afford to overorder. You have to pace yourself so you're not spending money on something you're going to burn at the end. Logistics is another concern, and the very availability of vaccines, as we just said. So there are quite a few factors that I believe would be affecting the numbers that we're seeing.
Great. France, the Paris Finance Summit this week said that Macron said he kind of supported more production of vaccines in Africa. Dr. Ngozi Konjo-Iweala, WTO Director General, has said, she said that vaccine patent waivers are not enough. I don't know, but it seems like Macron didn't directly say he supported waivers. Well, how do you see that whole thing playing out?
Well, Macron is really only one man and one player in a very complex situation. I think it's finding the middle road on this, because I think a couple of weeks ago we discussed the issue of, if you have the patent waiver, what does that mean for, pharmaceutical companies that have invested so much in trying to get the vaccines out speedily? But if you don't, what does that mean? And if there's anything that the COVID has shown us, is how interdependent we all are, because each individual, each city, each nation has to take individual responsibility, but then we realize that we are all in this together. Right. Not addressing the pandemic in one continent still leaves the rest of the world at risk. So we really do have to come together to address this. Yes.
Fantastic. I want to ask you about renewables. There's a whole lot of renewable discussions this week. What do you make of what Johannesburg is trying to do? 35% renewable target by 2030, I think.
So to put it in context, South Africa's greenhouse emissions is at par with the UK.
Wow.
Where the UK's economy is 8 times larger than South Africa.
That is a fantastic
So they are, shall we say, emitting far more than is there.
That is incredible. I did not know that.
Yes. So because almost all their power comes from coal plants.
Yes.
So they've realized for a while that they really do need to shift to cleaner forms of energy.
What does government regulation, what role does it play in all this? Because the government was last year, they said municipalities can shop around from companies not named ESCOM. Yeah. So what kind of impact does that have?
Everything, because it opens up the playing field, and it provides the opportunity for, one, the purchasers of power to be able to go out there and source for alternative forms of power, but also those who are looking to provide power. It just provides a regulatory framework for them to be able to do so more viably.
Very quickly, 20 seconds. State independence, is that good for development in Africa?
I believe that you're trying to take me to the conversation of restructuring, and what I would say on that one is authority must always lie where responsibility lies.
That's a brilliant way to end the conversation. Sanyade Okoli, CEO, Alpha African Advisory, thank you so much for joining us.